Oh, no, it's all right. I just wanted to, I guess, transition us. A few of us joined a bit early and started talking, and it was really great. And I know we'll be continuing that conversation. Um, I thank you to everybody who's joined us. And what we're going to do, the shape of this discussion is Danny's going to start with the discussion about the code of conduct. Um, Jeremiah is going to continue with the Transformative Justice Committee, Kathleen with the Be the Change Book Club, and Vince is going to share a bit about a new endeavor he is starting. And then we'll have space for conversation. So I'll pass it on to Danny. And I guess we were hoping, Jeremiah, that you'd be willing to facilitate the discussion.
Sounds good. I can do that.
Awesome.
Cool. Right. Well, I'm going to start then. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I think it's a really important discussion we're about to have. What I'm going to do is just tell you all about, I think, how the code of conduct appeared, a bit about myself, of course, and I want to also say about how we can maybe use it more effectively. I'll be fairly brief, just to give us more time for discussion. Anyway, I'm Danny Beaver. I was in VFP UK when I was living over in London. I was the London Regional Coordinator. I then became the National Events Coordinator, and I finished my stint over there as Chair of VFP UK. I'm now living in upstate New York. I'm a VFP lifetime member, and I'm running for the board. Enough about me. Right, the Code of Conduct started after an incident in the UK in 2015, where I guess we're all being old soldiers and having that old banter, and some really sexist behavior came out to the point where we needed to do something about it. And we discussed it and realized we needed to implement a code of conduct and have it in our handbook. So we sat down and wrote it, and in 2016 it became a formal part of VFP UK, and it's something we use now on a daily basis in discussions. We use it before actions. We read out, literally have it on our cell phones and read out the code of conduct before we do anything else. And that just gives people a bit of a grounding as to how their behavior needs to be while we're interacting with ourselves and other people. And we literally have it on our cell phones with us all the time. It's really changed VFP UK's attitudes towards each other, and it's really helped VFP UK move forward successfully to be able to concentrate on the mission rather than internal struggles. And I know that there's some people here who've been in VFP UK, and hopefully they can agree with me, or at least discuss it further if they think that anything could be done better in that way. In fact, I'm going to link it very quickly to you here, just so you can see how we use it over there. It's very similar to your code of conduct. There you go. That should be, you should be able to find it in that. You scroll down a bit. Now in 2018, I believe, it was taken from the UK and brought over to the US by Adrian, who put it towards the board, who discussed it, realized that it needed adapting slightly to become a viable document in the US. And I believe in 2019, it actually became part of your, I would say your handbook, or your policy book, I think it's called. And it's really nice that it's there. But I think what needs to start happening now is people need to start reading it, absorbing it, understanding it, and using it. Because without it, we really just seem to spend time going backwards rather than forwards. We put people off. People who are full of energy that come into the organization are getting treated dismally and leaving the organization to put their energies elsewhere. And unfortunately, it's happening on a daily basis within the VFP USA. It's something we need to discuss. It's something we need to promote. I know the staff are doing a good job of promoting it. It's available on the VFP website, sometimes a bit hard to find. I don't know if we can make it easier, but I'm going to link the VFP US's code of conduct here. You should have all read it, and you probably all have read it because you're on this call. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that should be on this call, which aren't, which could really do with reading it. Here's the link to that one. So that's the VFP US's Code of Conduct. That's just a brief introduction about it. I find it really useful. I've seen the differences made in VFP UK, and I really hope we can make this difference happen here. So I'm going to hand over to Jeremiah now.
Thank you, Danny. So I'm going to talk about the TJC, the Transformative Justice Committee, and also talk about what transformative justice is, some of the things we've worked on, and our processes that we're starting to develop as a committee that will hopefully reinforce a lot of this. Now, to piggyback off what Danny was just talking about, I think more than just being a code of conduct, it's also a set of shared values, right? We all agree upon these things as a way of culture and being within our organization. And so I love to use the term values because it becomes that way of just operating within a space, you know, how we live our lives day to day, rather than this is just how I have to act because this is a code of conduct, right? And that's really what transformative justice really focuses on, is in the kind of the label, transforming the culture of an organization to be more inclusive, to be more equitable, and to lean more towards a just process rather than a punitive process, a restorative process rather than a punishment process. So that's transformative justice. I'm going to read this definition because it's from Brown College, but they did a really good job of summing it up. So it says, in practical terms, transformative justice is a liberatory approach to violence, which seeks safety and accountability without relying on alienation, punishment, or state or systemic violence, including incarceration or policing. It is a set of practices for responding to interpersonal and structural violence that relies on community relationships to protect the safety and needs of survivors, while building systems of support and accountability for those who have caused and enable harm. And so I like that last part a lot, where it says, while building systems of support and accountability for those who have caused and enable harm, because the support piece for those who have even caused harm is also crucial. And that's what we mean by calling in often rather than calling out, is that even if someone has caused harm, yeah, I can copy and paste that into the chat. Even if somebody has caused harm, they still are deserving of support, you know, in the sense that we can still hold people accountable, but we can do it in a way that doesn't necessarily continue the violence. So you can actually find more about that definition. That's kind of like the first part of it. There's a lot more details. This is just that they have a really good definition of what transformative justice is. But I like to think of that as like kind of the overview, right? So I'm going to share my screen real quick too. I know I'm probably going into too much detail, but this is a good topic. Can everybody see this bubble chart? Good. Yes. So this one actually comes from a school-based program. I didn't make any of these, but this one comes from a school-based program, and it talks about different elements of a transformative justice practice, you know, what that process looks like. And so you can see that it takes a lot of different areas rather than just like, you know, one approach. So Garrett having and pushing for a what'd you call that? Why is the term blanking on me? An audit. Yes, an audit. Sorry. Is part of that process where we look at how we're operating in all these different areas. So, you know, the book club shares that responsibility of self-education. We have, you know, the book club, personal and group education sharing. Listening and reflecting could be like community building circles. Personal and group experiences. So everybody recognizing that everybody comes in with different aspects of themselves. Personal and group identities. I know in Gamers for Peace, we have the No Boys Allowed Club. I'm not allowed in it, you know, so it's a great space for people who are women identifying or non-male identifying people who can have a space that isn't invaded, you know, by primarily people that tend to perpetuate a lot of harm. Challenging systems of oppression. So when we have, even within our own group, there are sometimes oppressive systems that come into play that, like, you know, one thing that is going to be a challenge for me, even as a younger veteran, I think about Robert's Rules of Order, right? I don't know any of those. And it's going to be a lot of education just to learn how to use those things. And so even that can be a process that can be a little bit oppressive. It's just going to take a lot of work. So this is just like a huge overview of transformative justice. Now in the TJC, we've talked a lot about what restorative justice looks like. And, oh, thank you for correcting me, Jules. Sorry, I was just looking at the chat. Yes, it was a lot of VFP staff and board members. So kudos to all of you, because I think that's a huge step towards a transformative justice process. Now, restorative justice. So restorative justice, now we're kind of narrowing our focus. Restorative justice is a process or practice of restoring harm after it has occurred. But there's also a part of a process of preventing harm. So moving to kind of how restorative practices work, in their simplest way, restorative practices in a very simple way are just about bringing people together to talk and share their stories. Before conflict arises or harm is done, restorative practices make it possible for people to build relationships. The sense of community this interaction creates helps to prevent problems and makes it easier to resolve. So primarily, a lot of restorative practices use what they call the circle method. And the circle method is just a way of bringing groups of people together to sit and be able to allow space for people to be vulnerable, to have their stories be heard, and for their experiences to be validated and acknowledged. And in the TJC, we've been trying to figure out what that experience, what that process would look like for an organization that's not only nationwide, but is kind of having to use this technology of Zoom and having a reporting process or a reaching out process that might have some unique challenges because we're so spread out. So, and because of the technology piece too. So moving on a little bit more, restorative, I don't like how they use the term victim and offender in here. I like to use the term maybe like harm or harmer. But restorative justice processes also take into account the community, right? So there's an emphasis on community safety, community or competency development, accountability. Those are all things that kind of go into this process of restorative justice. And I will get into like what that process looks like and break it down for you. But I just wanted to like emphasize that this restorative process it's a holistic and rounded approach that validates every single participant within the process, including the person that caused harm. So I'm going to kind of get away from the charts for a second because I think they're actually throwing me off. So what does restorative processes look like? So where I work right now, I work for a college in upstate New York, and we've started implementing a restorative justice process within the college. And so we've worked at the TJC to kind of translate some of those processes over to what it would look like for VFP. in a nutshell, what happens is people have the opportunity to report. People have the opportunity to report a incident of bias or aggression or harm. We're doing that hopefully in a way that is accessible for everybody. And we recently created the Transformative Justice Committee email, TJC, at veteransforpeace.org. And people can make a report. You know, really the report just has to be like, you know, what happened and who was involved. And it's just a way, whoops, I sent that to the wrong thing. It doesn't have to be super specific. It's more of that first reach out. And then what happens is someone from the Transformative Justice Committee would either connect with that person who made the report, either via phone or email, preferably phone or Zoom, I would say, just to have that face-to-face. And then they would talk about the experience. There's three like main questions that you kind of have to answer is, you know, like what happened, what has happened since the harm has occurred, and are you willing to participate in the restorative justice process? Once that conversation happens, we call that the pre-conferencing phase. Once that happens, a member of the Restorative Justice or the Transformative Justice Committee would then reach out to someone, the person that had caused the harm, and kind of answer the same things. What happened? What has happened since the harm has occurred? And are you willing to participate in this kind of process? Yes, it will hopefully be up on the website soon. After that is determined, so this pre-conferencing phase has occurred, then a actual restorative justice circle can be implemented. And so a restorative justice circle is literally how it sounds. It is a circle format. So even in Zoom, we'll create like a virtual circle. And we allow space for everybody around the circle to share their experiences. And there are usually one or two leaders of the circle who aren't really connected with the events that kind of keep track of everybody, making sure everybody has a chance to share. And I'll be able to answer questions in a little bit, but that's a very good question, Jewel, and Jules, we'll get into that. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So whereas we have two leaders who are kind of managing the circle process, and the leaders will ask specific questions that help guide the discussion. So it might be one of the questions that's really common, of course, is like, what has happened since the harm occurred, right? And so now everybody gets to share what has happened since that event. I know that question will often be modified if it's a continued behavior, but similarly, it shows how even the harmer can sometimes experience a lot of shame and guilt since something like that occurred, and has an opportunity to even share that as well. So the leaders will ask a bunch of questions, keep people on track. Within the circle as well, I didn't emphasize this, but the person who caused harm and the person who was harmed are also able to bring supports with them to the circle. So this circle not only includes the person who caused harm and the person who was harmed, but includes community members, people who might have been present, and supports for both parties as well. So it is a very like inclusive space where we try to include as many people connected to the event or the experience as possible. Now, what I love about these circles or this circle process is it's not up to like the Transformative Justice Committee to determine any sort of consequences. It is up to the circle to determine what the needs are to restore that harm that has occurred. So I don't even like to use the term consequences, because a lot of these needs end up being very educational, very informative, very growth oriented for the person that had caused the harm. So it's not really a consequence. I don't want to look at it as a consequence, just something to check the box. It is a period of growth and relationship building that can occur. So that circle process decides what those needs are and what needs to happen to restore that relationship. So the Transformative Justice Committee members don't actually have any sort of say or influence on that. All they're doing is guiding that process. Once that has happened, at the end of the circle, a lot of this is just written up. You know, like I participated in a circle at the college where one of the needs was that the person who caused the harm needed to attend and complete like a racial justice seminar. And they're like, well, you know, the circle even identified one that was coming up next month because it's a college, they happen a lot. And the person promised to attend. And they actually, I think, ended up attending together, which was great. So that process, you know, that was written up, they agreed to it. They both signed this agreement, and, you know, they just followed through. The agreement is between the two parties to restore that relationship. It's not really with the Transformative Justice Committee or the college that I worked at. It's between those two people. So there's this inherent motivation to follow through with the recommendations if you really want to repair that relationship. Now, I will say sometimes it's not always successful. I've been involved with circles where literally just nothing happens. So there was one group on campus that it was a conservative group, and they said something that was anti-Asian kind of rhetoric, you know, towards our growing, U.S.'s growing conflict or animosity with China. And we had an Asian group on campus. I think it was a China culture group, and they took offense to that. And the other group just refused to change their post. It was a social media post. They refused to change their post. The apology was half-hearted, and what really just happened is the groups just started avoiding people. So sometimes they're not always successful, and that's when you have to still have other forms of accountability, and that's also important. Now, one of the other things that we do with restorative justice too is there is a process of how do we make sure like continued harm doesn't occur before we can actually have the process. So sometimes people who, this happens a lot at the college, people who have caused harm and the person that was harmed might be in the same class or the same group. Well, what is done is usually efforts are made for someone to take a step back and excuse themselves from that environment, so that way harm doesn't continue to occur until we can have a good restorative justice process. So it's okay to kind of just take a break, take a time out, you know, take a step back, however we want to characterize that. That's important to make sure that continued harm doesn't occur. I do firmly believe that a lot of harm that occurs, especially in tight-knit communities, are usually done because the person just didn't know what they were doing or didn't have context of why that might have been offensive or harmful to the other person, or wasn't taking into account that person's lived experience when they said something. So I try to approach each circle with that kind of mindset, that there is something that just needs to be understood between the two parties rather than just focusing on, you know, a consequence or some sort of negative kind of outcome. And so we have been working as well on trying to figure out what that kind of process looks like. So this is a very rough draft of what we've been working on in the TJC, but we're trying to identify what that kind of process looks like with kind of like a flow chart. So, you know, I kind of already explained this, but as we continue to figure out what this process is, it's going to be a bit of a trial and error as we add to this process. This process should be growing, should be evolving as we identify new barriers that maybe members of the TJC or that community members might have brought up that we didn't really realize. So this is where we're at now with the TJC. We're almost at a process of being able to implement a lot of these restorative justice practices. We are looking for more people who are willing to maybe learn about this process and become leaders of this process. So that way we have a diverse array of people willing to help conduct some of these restorative justice circles and help heal the harm within our organization. And if you are interested, please just feel free to email the Transformative Justice Committee email address and we'll reach out, and I'm hoping to be able to develop or have someone come in because I'm not a train the trainer certified kind of thing. But we'll kind of implement a training or develop a training that we can train as many leaders as we can. Now, the goal of this process, just like in the transformative justice context, is for this to be something that chapters will just inherently do almost on their own. So that would be the ultimate goal, right? Like that each chapter would have like maybe someone trained to do restorative justice or trained in the circle method, and chapters would just do it. And it wouldn't have to even approach the national committee, because it would just be an inherent culture to put everybody together, validate people's experiences, listen to people's experiences, and work on addressing what is needed to repair the harm, not just implementing punitive consequences. Now, I did notice a few questions in the chat, and I'll try to answer a few of them at the moment. Jules mentioned, a few people asked, what happens if the harmer is not willing to participate? So if the harmer is not willing to participate in the restorative justice circle, there are lots of community members that were also impacted by the event, right? So you can have a circle without the harmer or the harmed, because there's so many different community members that were impacted. So if the harmer doesn't want to participate, then you still have a circle and everybody gets to talk about that experience. Everybody gets to have their version of that experience validated. My perception of an event might be very different from Adrian's perception of an event, just based on our difference in upbringing and gender, right? I don't have to deal with a lot of the same kind of pushback as Adrian might experience, so I wouldn't even know. So it's nice, it's so informative and relationship building to be able to allow other members to express their individual lived experience around that event, and then I get to learn something about them, and then maybe I can change my behavior in the future to make sure I don't continue that harm, even if I wasn't the one that harmed in that particular event. So you can still have these circles. It is very good to still have these circles. If the person who was harmed directly doesn't want to participate, and for valid reason, it's still okay to do a circle, especially if the person that was harmed has supports within that circle, right? That can identify that this was the harm. It is much harder, I will say, to have the person that was harmed not participate. Sometimes the process can even turn a little negative, but it can still happen as long as you have good leaders and good supports for the person that was harmed. So Harold brings up another good question. Is any point of view validated in these circles? Is there no objective truth that's important? So I think that when you talk about relationships, it's hard to be objective, because the focus is on restoring the relationship, not the finding the truth. right? So whether or not, someone upset me because maybe they told me my hair was black. My hair is black, right? But that is objectively true, right? But it's about restoring the relationship. Maybe I was just having a bad day, right? But we can still have a circle where I can be like, I was just like having a bad day. And then when you told me my hair looked bad and that I should dye it because you don't like it, me and black hair just really hit me hard, right? Like, well, that's objectively true. My hair is black, but the relationship was somehow damaged, and having a circle can still be good, can still be helpful. Right, harm was done. That is the basis of the restorative justice process. Whatever the objective truth might be, the most important truth within the circle is that harm was done. That is the acknowledgement. If you can't acknowledge that harm was done, then having restorative justice circle is really hard to do. You can still have, and I didn't really talk about this, something called community building circles. So it's a great way to practice the circle process where no harm has occurred, but you still practice the circle process of allowing people to speak about their experiences, allowing people to express their feelings, allowing space for them to be listened to actively by the rest of the group. And it's a space where people get to learn about each other. It's great having this convention, but I don't get to learn anything about people as personally as I would like sometimes. And so being able to have a circle process, I've loved the social rooms because it's kind of turned into that. People go around being able to express themselves, and everybody is actively listening because Zoom inherently forces that to happen. Because you just can't talk over each other in Zoom. So it's been a really interesting experience being able to sit in the social room and have that circle process kind of just inherently happen. So it's been awesome. That's been my favorite part of the convention so far, because like I said, Zoom forces people to actively listen to everybody else because you can't interrupt, you can't jump in. It's really hard to talk over people in Zoom. And that's the circle process in a nutshell, is preventing people from just jumping in and talking over and people dominating the experience. Everybody within the circle gets a chance to express themselves. Right, TJ is not a courtroom, and it's an opportunity for individuals to grow and communities to heal. I just want to read the rest of that because it was really good. Is if there is an unwillingness to want to grow and an unwillingness to heal the community, then the TJ won't work for them. We have to ask ourselves if we want members with that attitude. Since we are responsible for harm done in our community, we all should be able to admit to some part in what occurred and the environment we allowed to have that happen. Right. I would also add to that you can have these. Yes, thank you for the time check. You can have these restorative circles even without those people. And it's important probably to still have those without those people. There was one other question that someone pointed out that I wanted to answer. What do you all suggest with a serial abuser over years? Again, like the great thing about the circle process is that it can hold space for that. They use a circle as this kind of analogy because it grows and expands with whoever's in it, right? So as members might leave or come in, the circle can open up and make space for those members, or it can kind of close down and as people exit the circle. So if someone is kind of that serial abuser, it can still be a process where people get to share maybe their experiences with that person and share maybe some of the harm that they have caused to them, and that then the person who has caused the harm gets to express maybe why they were doing it, right? So often a lot of us are veterans here, and we've lived through some very negative experiences, and we carry that weight within ourselves. So sometimes our experiences are motivated or influenced by that weight, which is very separate from the experiences maybe we're having within the group where we cause the harm. So we'll have a chance to kind of express that, that was a really bad day. It was the anniversary of my buddy's death, and I didn't mean to yell at people, and maybe there's a lot of these anniversaries. But then the circle gets a chance to be like, well, what is needed to repair the harm? Maybe what's needed is that person to put a greater emphasis on their mental health and start attending therapy or therapy groups to address some of those triggers that they're experiencing. So the circle ends up getting to decide what or agree what that harm, what the restoration of that harm needs to be. And then, of course, it's up to the person that caused the harm to really follow through. And that relationship building really becomes that motivator for people wanting to follow through. Yeah, actually, there's a great exercise I really love where everybody in Zoom brings their own talking stick and then gets to talk about why that object or that talking object is important to them. And you get to learn a lot about people in that process. So I don't want to take up any more time. I know I've gone over a lot. I think I'm passing it to Kathleen to talk about the book club.
Good morning, everybody, or midday for those of you who are not on the West Coast like me. Yeah, so we've been doing the book club since the last convention. The impetus of the Be the Change Veterans for Peace book club came from a workshop that we did called the Veterans for Black Lives. And for those of you who don't remember that particular, I don't know if you call it a workshop or what, but it was at the last year's convention. Basically what it was an open, candid discussion with Black veterans on their experiences and reflections during the current movement for racial justice and Black liberation. This comes from their description. The conversation will include ways in which VFP members can participate, mobilize, show up, and grow relationship in an intersectional movement. We can talk about the best ways we can be part of the movement and continue to center local Black leaders and their first voice experiences. We are moved to activate. Let's get organized and share best practices. So we were, the people that attended that were very deeply moved and impacted. And there was a decision made right then and there as we were having discussion that we might do a book club. This book club would be more than just a book club, though. It would be about learning, reflecting, growing, looking at our own biases. Our mission or our group purpose that we wrote up together talks about learning, reflecting, taking action in a safe and open social space, and learning about the ways in which colonization, racism, gender bias, white supremacy, other biases show up in our lives and in our activism. Growing our awareness of how our words and actions affect and are related to the society we live in, and how our personal behaviors contribute to the culture of Veterans for Peace. This allows us to be more accountable to ourselves and to others, increases our individual agency as activists, as human beings. So we've been doing this for a year. We've read 4 books. There's a lot of people that are here that are part of that book club. And there's been a lot of amazing things that have grown out of that. We started with reading White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And then we went on to Layla Saeed's book, Me and White Supremacy, which is much more of a journal. And we were tasked to do a lot of writing about ourselves and our own experiences, looking at many of the different microaggressions and that come about in our daily lives, and that we or other people experience, and what our part is in it. So we grew a community out of this book club, and we've become very, very close. It's not a huge community, unfortunately, though. We've been trying to bring more people in, and for whatever reason, you know, we're not growing as much as we'd like to, and we're hoping that through this convention that other people will find it a safe place to come, because it's much more than just reading a book. It's really about sitting together in community, and in a compassionate, loving, open, safe place to talk about the struggles and to be honest. And our book club basically has been white people. And we kind of focused on that because we felt we had the work to do. That doesn't mean that any other people are not welcome, but we didn't want to impose our work and affect other people of color's emotional, how shall I say it? The work that we have to do as white people is very tiring for people of color, to have to be there and be the ones lifting it up and explaining things. So we've taken that accountability onto ourselves to do our own work. And then if we need to reach out for some reason, we can. That may change. It is a horizontal group. Nobody makes decisions on their own, so we work together. I think that we've had several people that have moved forward. Like, we have one member that has a radio show that's taken what she's learned out into her doing interviews with people in her community and veterans. You're going to hear from Vince, who's talking about opening up a men's group. So it's not like we sit there, we go home, you know, we go home from Zoom and that's it. This is praxis. We're hoping that this makes a difference in our organization. And I want to say that VFP is not alone. You know, I work with National Lawyers Guild in Los Angeles, and the same kind of stuff is happening there. I do want to mention how sad it is that out of that Veterans for Black Lives workshop, not one of those persons that led that workshop is on the board anymore. It was Michael and Natasha and Miles, and we've got to acknowledge that, and we've got to, you know, we've got to own our part, even if we think we're perfect and not racist, because I'll be the first to tell you that I'm still working through my own biases on a daily, momentary basis. And the first work that any of us have to do, and I think that we realize and we support each other in our community in this book club, is looking at ourselves and what we can own. And it doesn't really have to do with anybody else. You know, it's looking at our own ego, breaking down that ego, looking at, you know, where is all of this stuff coming from? Is it coming from fear? Is it resentment? You know, what is it? Let's break it down. Let's be open and honest. So I hope that, I wanted to say that we also just read 2 other books, All About Love by Bell Hooks. And then we read Unconventional. We had the plenary from Mike Mesner on that book, and we're still finishing up that book. But I think that we could go back and start reading those books or other books as well again, if other people wanted to step back and kind of educate themselves more on what all these different things mean. What does racism, colonization, gender bias, you know, white supremacy, what does it really look like? What does it look like in our organization? So anyway, I'm here. I'm willing to help. I know the other members of the book club are here as well. And we're not here to blame or judge, but just to work and grow together because we're all in the same boat. Thanks.
I guess I'm next. I'm Vince Dianich, and I've been part of the Be the Change book club from the beginning. And part of an outgrowth of that is we decided we wanted to have a men's group, and I decided I wanted to lead it because I lead another group of veterans in another project that I'm involved in. And I think you can't do this kind of work alone, this transformative work. You know, we need to figure out how to back each other and how to help each other look at different things and how to do that with love and compassion and connection. And I think that's kind of basically my ideas from the group. I have a lot of resources that I can offer. And in terms of what the form and VFP lingo is going, whether it's going to be a discussion group or a working group, has yet to be determined, because I think the men in the book club, we haven't gotten together since I kind of offered to do this, and that's been partly because I've been involved in other work for the, you know, up to the convention, partly spending a fair amount of time working with the Barbara Lee's legislative aid about our resolution that she's going to introduce for the climate group, and you know, working on the workshop as well. So, and other things, but I think after that, after we do this, we have another meeting, I think, with all the men and talk and figure things out. Because I want to build a team to help me lead this. I don't want to do it alone, and I think that's particularly an appropriate and good model for men to do this work. Because you know, you have this kind of part of the toxic masculinity, you know, the way toxic masculinity works is everybody looks to the great leader. And sometimes, you know, and I don't believe in that, and I don't think that it works that way. So I'm gonna, if any of the men are interested in this group, I'm gonna put my email in the chat, and you can contact me. And I will do that in a couple of minutes when I finish talking, but you can contact me. And when we figure out how this is going to roll out, there'll be more to follow. And that's all I want to say specifically about the men's group at this point. And I want to gather us together, those men who want to be the agents of change. There's, you know, I've taken a philosophy for years that I got from the women's movement of the personal is political. And, you know, everything that you do, every interaction that you have has political content and consequences. And I figure that's why I joined the Be the Change book club. I consider myself a cultural revolutionary, among other things. And I said, well, this is a good place to maybe figure something out, and I'm happy that it's finally come to some fruition. So anyway, I'm going to put my email in the chat, and men who are interested in being in this group, or if you're not a man and you know some man that might be interested, in that case, please don't send me any people that you want me to fix, because I'm not in the business of fixing people. It doesn't work that way. If people, you can't make people change. You know, people have to have a willingness to do that. So I'm just going to say that. I'm just going to I'm going to finish there, and I'll put my email in the chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vince. I saw a few more questions pop up in the chat. So now I think we'll be moving into our Q&A piece. If you do have a question, feel free to raise your hands. But I want to address a few things I saw pop up in the chat. So first, Monisha brought up some really valid points about a lot of the limitations of restorative justice and transformative justice generally. So, you know, I'm a very hopeful person, so sometimes it's hard for me to talk about some of these limitations, but they're very real, in the sense that, you know, if they're not always a replacement for maintaining the safety of the community, right? So if someone is continuing to cause harm, and that is continuing to cause harm to the community as a whole, sometimes that action of removing that person from the community needs to occur. And some space needs to be allowed, so that way there can be a cooling off period before any sort of like restorative or transformative justice committee can happen. And I didn't emphasize this enough either, that this restorative process is very much a process led and centered by primarily Black women, and who have really done a lot of the work in developing these kind of practices. And these practices even date further back to a lot of indigenous cultures. And it's important to emphasize and center that perspective, because this, as most of us here being white people, this is not something we're used to. You know, Western culture does not emphasize this community building process. It doesn't emphasize this perspective of working together and healing harm and validating other people's experiences. So I think that's extremely important to recognize. If restorative justice processes aren't applicable, and I don't know if you got to see that part in my flow chart, but there is, if they aren't applicable or can't occur, there still needs to be consequences. There still needs to be something that takes place, because not acknowledging it is far worse than the consequences or the punitive consequences that might need to occur. I think that's just a really important thing to emphasize. One of the other questions I noticed was, does it ever occur that the victim causing the harm was also a victim? Harm goes in all directions. And I like to say, and we say this a lot in therapy all the time, hurt people hurt people. So more often than not, you know, when someone is hurting, they cause pain, right? So that's what I like about the circle process, is it gets a chance for those that caused harm to talk about their pain as well. And another point that Monisha makes is, like, sometimes that can be a process that of manipulation, that people who caused harm can kind of almost swindle their way out of having like really impactful changes that they need to make. But I also think that is one of the helpful things of having community circles, right? So like, it shouldn't be just the person who caused the harm and the person who was harmed. It should be many people within that community. And that way the community members can help hold that person accountable as well, right? So more often than not, this isn't a one person versus one person. Even if the event took place in isolation, often that person maybe like said something to their friend or expressed this to a confidant. That person can still be involved in the process as well to support the person who was harmed. And the other huge emphasis, of course, is you're centering the harm. You're already in agreement that harm occurred. You're already in agreement that someone was injured by the person who caused harm. And I think that's extremely important. All the questions that you ask in these circles center that harm. You know, since that harm occurred, how has that impacted your daily life? And that's something we might ask the person who was harmed. So they can further emphasize that since then, I have felt uncomfortable coming to meetings. I've felt an inability to do any work with anybody. Like, they can continue to re-emphasize that that harm had a huge impact. And so that's the most important piece, is centering that harm. And Munisha, if I miss anything, please let me know. And there was one other question, is how does TJ work if injuries are old? Same way. You can still have a circle process even if the injury caused years ago, because you can still talk about, you know, since that happened 5-10 years ago, I've just felt super uncomfortable ever since being in the same room alone with this person. Right? You can still have that conversation within that circle process. It really doesn't matter how old it is. Right. Yo-Yo made a great point, is often harmers don't even know that they too have been harmed by the systems that they are using to harm others, right? You know, we are often reharmed. Even if I cause harm, the system is still causing me harm, right? Because if you think of the sense of I am missing out on that relationship, that perspective, that experience with another person, because I am now perpetuating harm from a system that is harming me by taking that perspective, that experience, and that community away from me. If you have a question, go ahead and like raise your hand using the reactions button. If you have anything, any questions, please just either raise your hand or put them in the chat.
And just to do a quick time check, I put this in the chat, but in case people didn't see, this panel is going to end now, but we really have a whole other hour before the next session. So we have definitely time to continue with this space.
I also want to say that folks can move over to the social room if they want to continue discussions even past time. I know many of us are going to need to go or want to go to this next panel with the 9/11 veteran organizing, but these conversations are really important. So I understand if you're not at the panel and you want to continue the discussions in the social room.
And I've had a lot of trouble keeping up with the chat because it's moving so fast. But I see Janet has her hand raised, so let's start there and go ahead, Janet.
Thanks, Jeremiah. I regret that we're not actually hearing Monisha's voice, although, you know, what she's bringing to this discussion is so important in the chat. And just to follow up on my own comment in the chat, there's a very wide range of behaviors and speech. And it seems to me that there needs to be definition of what raises to the level of starting this transformative justice process, and also things that go beyond what it can do. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I hope to continue the conversation with a smaller group in the social room. I know we're all feeling and thinking a lot, and I think it's hard to really get into it with this many people, you know. So, but anyway, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Janet. That's really important and something the Transformative Justice Committee has been trying to figure out. And that's why, you know, Danny brought up the code of conduct. That's extremely important for helping us identify where that line is. You know, if it's a blatant violation of the code of conduct, maybe there needs to be other consequences other than just the restorative justice process. And what would that look like too?
Mhm.
So it's
Yeah, I'm sorry, if I could just could follow up with one thing. I was very struck, Danny, rereading the code of conduct, that the very first thing is about anger. I think anger is the fourth or fifth word in the code of conduct. And I'm just wondering if we could ever look at rewriting the code of conduct. I mean, the first thing that occurred to me was that it's not just anger, but our desire for a better world, for justice, for peace, are very major motivations. So anyway, I just, offer that for what it's worth.
Greg, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, thanks. I just this is almost a technical idea, but I've been made aware of a group in Berkeley that is called empathy circles, and I just occurs to me that this could be one technique to use with transformative justice if you have people who are so worried that if they join in the transformative justice process that they will be smacked down or something and they refuse to participate. An empathy circle is a safe way to get everybody in because you don't prescribe, you don't judge, you just listen. And then you take turns speaking and listening, and the listener has to try to repeat back what the person is saying, not just the words, but what's behind the words. And then there has to be a good facilitator, because sometimes people don't quite catch what the meaning of the words are. And so they bring that out. And I think it could be useful maybe as a bridging step when people are like reluctant to participate. I'll put in the chat a link to some information about that.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. That would be wonderful. I like that interesting point of being able to repeat back. I've never done that technique, and that sounds really interesting. It would be cool to kind of implement. John?
Can everybody hear me?
You're a little quiet.
Oh, how is this?
Much better.
Okay. All right. I learned something from the Occupy movement. I would like to say that I have hot buttons. I'm a hot reactor. So was my dad. And when I get into discussions and I find something irksome, I start to heat up and express myself in a way which probably comes across to a lot of people as pretty scary. And that has to do with a lot of the reason why I left the book club. I felt myself getting really angry about certain issues, and I didn't feel like it was doing any good for me to express that anger and get in the face of some of the people who were committed to the work in the book club, and let the book club go on its own without my trying to interject my baggage into it. And I just wanted to share that with the rest of the group and the panelists.
Thank you for sharing that, John. And actually, I think Vince could help you with that experience.
Yeah, I think maybe Vince's group of men might be a good way for me to get started with that. Thank you.
I just want to thank you for acknowledging that too, John. I know that's really hard to say in front of a bunch of people and admit that, and that's like one of the first steps to really making that change. Vince, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I wanted to, I tell John, I think all of us have hot buttons, and it's kind of like to figure out where to disconnect them and how to do that. And I think that's probably one of the things that I want to do in the book club, but it's not originally why I raised my hand. I wanted to reply to Janet. I'm troubled too by the first thing in the code of conduct. I don't think it should be revised. I think that it's a reflection of the reality of VFP. It's a reflection of that this is a male organization, and one of the main emotions that men can easily access is anger. I think most of us are pretty numb to other things, and I've done some work with anger. Oh, and the thing I found is that there's a lot of things underneath anger: heartbreak, grief, disappointment, and anger is just a surface emotion. And I think as long as people in this organization reacting, that's an appropriate thing to have in the code of conduct. I don't think it should be the first one. I like what Janet said about, we're all committed to transformative justice, and therefore, or something like that. But I think I don't think it makes sense to act on any emotion. I think emotions need to be processed so you can free your thinking up and put out your best thinking. And that's a long, slow process. But and then, the thing about transformative justice and other things is sometimes you have to draw a line in the sand with people's issues and say, you either need to figure out how to change or you need to leave because you're causing a lot of harm to this organization and you're creating a toxic culture. And that's an individual decision based on every case. I don't know that you can draw a hard and fast rule when to do that. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Vince. Yeah. Anger is often that secondary emotion. There's almost always something else underneath it. And to really heal the anger, you have to heal that emotion underneath it, and figure out what that is. Adrian, I see your hand up.
Sorry, I can't use the blue hand as a host, but I just wanted to reflect, and sometimes maybe this is a good opportunity of the way language is used and what somebody means versus how it's taken. When you're explaining anger and that VFP is a men's organization, it's an organization that has a lot of men in it. It is not a men's organization. It's an organization that has a lot of older white men in it, but it's not an older white men's organization. It's an organization for all of us. And, this is what we're working on. So it's a process, but I just wanted to acknowledge that because I kind of tweaked a little bit, and I know based on the chat a few others tweaked, and yeah, so thanks, that's all.
Thank you, Adrian. Bob, you have a question?
It's not a question, it's a comment. And this workshop is so rich for me because it reminds me of one of my really beautiful experiences teaching school in the East Bay of the San Francisco area. I taught the yearbook class, and at the end of every deadline, we had a game that we played, and it was called I've Got a Withhold. And if I had a withhold, I would say to you, Jeremiah, I have a withhold, would you like to hear it? And then you would say yes, and then I would blast all over you about you did something wrong. And then there would be apologies because we had enough trust. And then we'd move on to the next one. And then toward the end, this was after every deadline, it had to be positive. And these are bratty suburban high school kids. And it would always get around to love and forgiveness without me having to boss everyone around. It just set it up and unfolded it. And the yearbook class, as we went along, got closer and closer and more full of respect and caring. So I've been sitting here resisting sharing that, but then some woman on another Zoom thing told me I needed to do it. So I always do what I'm told. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. That's wonderful. That was a great story. And, you know, it shows too, like the importance of building community and really getting to know each other, right? Like you can't have that type of vulnerability without that trust. And so building that is super important.
One other thing that was the marker too is I played the game just like I was one of the students. This was not always easy for a teacher, I'm telling you. Anyway, thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you. David, do you have a question? I think you're muted.
I don't know if it's a question as much as it's a comment with a question that I don't have all the answers for. It's something I'm working on every day. And that is, to me, it seems, I can only speak personally for myself, but in observing people and suspecting a lot of what goes on in VFP, since there's a lot of trauma in most of us, if not all of us, of one sort or another, whether it came through the military or before or after from some other source, it's there. But before the trauma and before the anger, one of the things that occurred for many of us and can be a continuing trigger point, and that's betrayals. And those betrayals can be multi-layered, major things, or they can be micro betrayals of something that occurs when we're out in the community. And there, I find that they can be immediate triggers for me. And how to catch those is something that I'll be talking with my psychologist with again at the VA when I meet her again in September. But how we can monitor those triggers in ourselves, we can know what they are. I know very well, for me, it's betrayal, you know, and from being in the war. But the other thing that's really important for us to remember is it's not just betrayals by other people. It can also be betrayals by ourselves. And that's often where moral injury comes into the whole equation. You know, our presidents and our military leaders and our congressional leaders and the larger community out there, which is ultimately responsible for sending a lot of us off to war. Those are betrayals when you have a situation like in Iraq, a Vietnam, and I suspect there's going to be a whole lot of betrayal arising in people who served in Afghanistan, because what in the, F was I there for? You know, so I don't have any real answers for that, but betrayal, and often, you know, it's the old, when you're pointing a finger, there's three of them pointing back at you. It's always a good thing to remember. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, David. I know that's not easy to admit and acknowledge those triggers, and I think that's a first important step, because, you know, even if we can't figure out what they are or how to address them yet, we can further emphasize the importance of impact over intention. So, you know, even though maybe I was triggered and I didn't really intend to hurt somebody else, I did hurt somebody else. And I was able to identify that I was triggered by something, but now I still need to harm the impact or restore the harm from the impact I had on someone else. So it's always, we try to emphasize that impact over intention. I think more often than not, especially in tight communities, the intention's usually good. I was trying to teach them something. That's something, that I think my dad said a lot, right? I was just trying to teach you something. Well, you were kind of an a-hole about it, right? Like, so you didn't teach me anything. It just hurt. And so when you emphasize intent over impact, it excuses behavior. So that's why we always try to emphasize that impact. What happens, what was the harm that was really caused, regardless of whether you meant to do it or not. Vince?
Yeah, I've been reading the chat, and there's been a lot of kind of comments on my use of the word rational. Harming other people is not rational. Racism is not rational. Male domination is not rational. Class oppression is not rational. Capitalism is not rational. They're not rational and they're not human. And I think I'm trying to take the word rational back from kind of the male paradigm, which it's kind of interchangeable with logical, which is not always rational, because a lot of people's logic is based on their role in the world as oppressors. Homophobia is not rational. Heterosexism is not rational. Child abuse is not rational. I mean, that's kind of the way that I frame that word. And I think one thing that also is different is intent impact. I think the impact I think that's correct but I also think that we have to assume that everybody that's in VFP has good intentions. And people need to know that we assume that your intentions, and I think it needs to be stated, that yes, we assume that your intentions are good, but however, your behavior did not have a good impact, and we'd like you to look at it. End of story for now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There was Bob, actually, I wanted to highlight your comment. While you're doing this, doing the behavior, you were thinking it is rational. And we talk a lot about that a lot in therapy. I might not have cleared that. I am a therapist, but we talk about what we call cognitive distortions or thinking errors, and they are basically like logical fallacies that everybody in the entire world is guilty of at some point in time. A lot of them are like black and white thinking. One common one, I think, in peace movements, I think I mentioned this in another thing, was called heaven's fallacy. I do good things, so good things should happen to me. And that's not always true either. So often when we are causing harm, we think it's rational. And then when we really break it down, we realize that it's not. And so that's why understanding triggers, understanding some of these logical fallacies that we all fall into can be helpful in identifying when we're kind of falling into those traps. I noticed that Garrett said we only have like a few more minutes. So if there are any other like last questions or anything, last questions or comments, the chat's blowing up and I'm having such a hard time keeping up with it. Kathleen?
Yeah, I'm reading the chat too, and I would love to hear from Ellen regarding restoring the better situation before the damage. And my question would be with that, was it a better situation if the damage occurred, or do we grow to another place? But I'd love to hear your thoughts, Ellen, more on that so that we can better understand that perspective. Thanks.
Obviously, it's a complicated situation, and yes, of course, the situation was not perfect before, but restoring the damage means restoring the harm, the bad. And that is what I'm objecting to. Restoring a more comfortable situation with better understanding, something, more words. It always takes more words, but we don't want to restore the damage is all I'm saying.
That's a great point, Ellen, and it's actually a huge argument within this movement about using the word restorative, because does that mean we're going backwards? And we really we want to go forward. We want to be addressing that harm and realizing that harm occurred, and then not going back to what created that harm in the first place. So you make a very valid point, Ellen, and it's that's why that sometimes they use that word transformative, you know. Yeah. Any other comments or questions? Jules makes a great point, is that we really need to continue talking about this and reinforcing this, not just with the people here, because there's 52 of us right now. There was 66 of us, I think, at some point. It's really important to continue having these conversations, even within our local chapters, about the importance of addressing the impact that we have on one another. Colleen?
Hi, everyone. I just want to say that I am just like overjoyed at how many people are here and how many people have been showing up for these hard conversations. And I want to say that for me, it's actually been incredibly gratifying, because sometimes as staff, we hear a lot of complaints, and we don't see the folks that are just putting their heads down and really working really hard on creating like better spaces. And so it can really alter our view. And I can just be really honest that coming into convention, I was really, really not in a like good emotional place when it came to my job. And I'm grateful for some people like Becky who listened to my frustrations when I was really angry. I'm grateful for an email from Kathleen that really called me to remind me to be my better self. And so I think that, and I'm really grateful for staff actually, that and Adrian and others who are encouraging and doing this work. And I think I just also want to point out how much like creating new things and entering into new processes is hard work, and there's going to be mess ups, and that we just need to be really, really aware of the nature of white supremacist culture, which tells all of us that we have to be perfect and all the time, and that all these processes need to be, you know, clear and shiny, and that as if they're not made up of people who are trying hard and failing, but that they just keep trying. And so I think that the more we can enter into spaces with grace and patience, and like the hope and intent for one, and the realization that everyone wants what's best for this organization, and not just this organization, but for the broader world. I mean, I think we're all here because we actually want a world that doesn't harm one another, you know. We want in the earth. And, you know, I know that with or without Veterans for Peace, like I'm still going to be doing work to eradicate militarism and racism and capitalism, like, and sexism. Like, these are all things that I'm going to be working on regardless of, you know, where I'm positioned in whatever movement space I'm in. And so I think we can assume that all of us are here for those, you know, for wanting those things too. And that, you know, I know that sometimes we can get really stuck in who we have relationships with, and as opposed to actually really looking, like joining in the work. You know, if there's a suggestion, you know, maybe the first question can be like, how can I support, like, I think this would be a good idea. Like, how can I support this to make this happen? You know, we get a lot of emails of like, why didn't VFP do this? Or why didn't VFP do that? And most of the reason is because we just don't know what you're doing, you know, or like, maybe, you know, like there are ways that we can, you know, we are a member organization, and so members taking ownership and making things happen is how things happen. And so I think the more we like enter in enter in these spaces, not just for around restorative or around transformative justice, but also around Ellen, I'm also using old language because I came into movement work also, and the term was restorative justice, and it has changed in the last 5 years as abolition terminology has entered into our and movement spaces. So so I always have to I'm retraining my brain on that stuff. But I think that I think that there's lots of opportunities to create change, even when we're talking about some of the Climate and Militarism Project or Reclaiming Armistice Day, all of these are spaces where if there's, join in that work, let's build community with one another. Because sometimes we can get, really focused on the process, but the process is supposed to, like Jeremiah said, should occur in all of our spaces. And so, and sometimes when we're doing the work, as this is coming out, we can use these tools to help us, organize in the way that we want to live. And I think that's what I try to hold all the time. And there are times where I'm not my best and I'm not organizing in the way that I want to live. And I'm grateful for a community of people that calls me back into that life. And so I just want to say that I'm just incredibly grateful for everybody who shows up. And I think people will find that people will welcome that. There might be some tension of hey, I don't like this language, but if we can all keep assuming the best of one another, the more likely we are to create a process that includes all of us and makes everybody feel like this is a place that they want to be. And that means just checking our egos. Sometimes we're wrong, and we can just say that's okay. All right, that's all. Sorry.
Thank you, Colleen. And I know we're out of time, but I'm going to let Marty have the last voice here. And then if people want to continue this conversation, I highly encourage you to go to the social room. You're muted, Marty.
I'm on 2 computers, so I am already in the social room with John Ivins. But what I wanted to say was to ask people to look around. There are members of our community who are no longer participating. They're still with us, they're still doing the work, but they're not actively part of the community because they've been overlooked. Their pains have been overlooked. Maybe there's something in their personal lives that's been really painful, and it's not a peace action or an anti-war action, but they need support. And when they are, they may give us a few clues, and when those clues aren't received, they step back because it hurts way too much. And I could name a few people. I'm not allowed to, but I could name a few people. And so we all need to go back and consider the groups we're actively working in and think about who used to be here with us. Are they still members? Do we need to, what do we need to do to pull them in? Because they sometimes need us to say, I see you, come back in. Let me make a space for you. Let me set aside my busy activist world and take time to listen to you. So that's it.
Thank you, Marty. Colleen, did you have one last thing to say?
Yes, I'm sorry, and then I have to go because I'm doing the tech.
Right, well, yeah.
But I just wanted to say, a lot of you all said, this is just a shameless plug, but a lot of you all were talking about things being difficult to see on the website. And yay, we're building a new website because our website is 10 years old, which in the world of internet is 90 in internet years. So we have to, so our website tech is actually no longer being supported. So we need to update it. And so it's an opportunity to redo it. So one of the things is that I would love, if you're interested in that, is we would like to form a feedback crew of members that we can do a little presentation with you, maybe every couple of months, to say this is kind of what we're thinking. Because part of that is we're going to really, our thinking is that we're going to really shift the website to be more around bringing people in, and then members being able to find important information. Those are our two main goals. And so it would be great to form a little committee that would, Sam and I could present, and Lisa, another veteran member who's been helping us with this, to present some of the things that we're thinking. And it would be a low level participation. It would be like maybe an hour or two every 2 months or 3 months. So yeah, if anybody wants to do that, email me. All right, sorry. Bye, y'all. It's lovely to see your voices or see your faces this morning.
Thank you all for joining us today, and I hope to see more of you in the next session and in the social room. Peace.